by Michael Thelender, who's a founder and CEO of Signals Research, and also Joanne Steinberg, who's a director of strategic marketing at Techelec. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the diameter signaling market, just kind of get an overview of the market, kind of what's happening in the space right now, and for further references on this too, we've got a report on our website that we posted last week on the topic too. So if you have some questions, there should be some more, hopefully some more answers in there. But anyway, we'll start off. Me and Mike will talk a little bit about the topic, and then we'll have Joanne come on at the end there to give kind of a Techelec's perspective on it as well. So Mike, we'll start out, I guess, with you and me, just kind of talking a little bit of an overview on it. I know we were both at the LTE North America show last week, and I'd say for myself, I was a bit surprised by how much talk there was kind of the signaling market. The show in the past has been very LTE technology specific, and it seemed like it was digging a little bit deeper this year. And I know I think you moderated a panel there as well on the topic. So maybe start out with you, just get maybe an overview from you, maybe a definition of what you see kind of this market, where this market is right now.
Yeah. So just to start off, I mean, actually, there's been a lot of interest in signaling in general. Just going back to the LTE World Summit in Barcelona.
Yep.
Once again, it was a packed house, talking about signaling, and I believe they had the same thing at the LTE event in Asia. And I think a lot of the interest is, in a way, stemming from some of the challenges we saw in 3G as it applied to signaling and what that can do to a network. Now, we're talking about two completely different kinds of signaling, but I think people are realizing that, there are signaling implications, and as operators are designing their networks and deploying their networks, they have to architect them for both the data traffic, but also the control traffic, the signaling traffic as well. Diameter signaling, SIP signaling is definitely different than what we had with the 3G signaling, which brought a lot of networks to their knees. But when you think about it, people are looking at it and saying, I really need to think about not only the data traffic side of my network, but also the signaling side.
Yeah, makes sense. Does it seem like to you that the carriers, that network providers, are aware of this need at this point? Because when I was doing the report over the past couple of weeks, talking to different companies involved, one thing I guess I was surprised about is that it did seem like that while LTE networks are rolling out pretty aggressively, I mean, Verizon is probably more than 2/3 of the way done with its network, and AT&T is very aggressive. That it seems like when it comes to kind of installing diameter or some sort of signaling controller inside a network, that carriers might still be in the early stages of it. And is that kind of what you're seeing, or what you're perceiving? And is that how smart is that? I mean, to me, it seems like it'd be a mistake to kind of get late in on this. I mean, what are you seeing kind of on the actual deployment front of this?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, you're right. I mean, going back to some of the issues that Verizon Wireless had as it pertained to signaling, and
yes,
the European operators, you're right that they've kind of overlooked the signaling dimension. But to their credit too, when you talk about the signaling storm, as people like to call it,
yeah,
it's really not a phenomenon that's tied to LTE networks today. When you start thinking about signaling and diameter signaling, it really comes into play with things like policy control, roaming, those types of things. And we don't have VoLTE today. The networks today are fairly immature when it comes to services, so operators are not operating differentiated services. They're not trying to do quality of service. So to that extent, there's not nearly as much diameter signaling traffic as there could be. I think also separate from just the diameter signaling aspect of it, these networks are still being rolled out. Mm-hmm. And it's one thing to deploy your radio access network everywhere. It's another thing to look at it from a core network perspective. And I think what a lot of operators are doing, especially in North America, is kind of going to a centralized approach, kind of going light, if you will, on the number of nodes they have in their network. Then obviously scaling as they build out their networks and as capacity comes into play. So on the one hand, I definitely agree that they're not necessarily thinking as much as they should or deploying, their signaling nodes in the way that they could. But to their credit too, I don't think it's that urgent at this moment. Obviously, it's something you need to think about, but really more in the long term as you start, or maybe in the next couple of years, as you think towards things like VoLTE, doing policy control, roaming, etc.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good point. You're right. It is. It does seem like, yeah, like you said, it is still kind of an immature rollout at this point. Like you said, carriers are still just kind of getting it out there. It's still just basic data services, smartphones at this point. So that's a good point. Yeah, you're right. It does seem like, I guess there's, still some runway there that they have to play with when it comes to rolling this out. So that's a good point there. And then I guess maybe talk a little bit about going back to the show from last week. Was there anything about at the event that kind of struck you or stuck out at with kind of what you were seeing there when it came to this? I mean, were there some of the speakers that maybe brought something up that you thought was pretty interesting on the topic, or anything that really kind of stuck in your mind about that event when it came to kind of all the talk about signaling?
No, I mean, I think one of the things, and this kind of resonated as well at the Barcelona event back in May, is that when you look at the LTE standard and you look at the diameter protocol, the network wasn't really designed from a standards perspective, and the diameter protocol wasn't necessarily developed for how it's being used. And so you look at the LTE standard, and it's really more about a mesh network architecture, which is kind of how it was defined. The diameter protocol was invented or standardized well before LTE was developed. So in a way, you're trying to stick a round peg in a square hole and make it work. And I think that's leading to some of the challenges that operators are facing. I think one thing that really resonated with me is, I know back in the kind of the early days of looking at this issue, some companies were talking about, oh, the mesh network architecture doesn't work. We got to have centralized routers, and I kind of look at it as being, oh, this is a company positioning type of thing. But it's interesting, I have yet to hear a single company say otherwise. I think it's really a question of still how you dimension your network. But I think from an architecture perspective, I think all companies agree, and operators, that what's defined in the standard versus the best way to do it are kind of two different things. So I think we'll see over time operators recognizing that this mesh network approach may work, but it doesn't scale, and it's hard to add nodes. And I think I've yet to meet anybody that disagrees. I think the only perhaps area of uncertainty is how big the signaling issue will be. And is it going to be, how fast does it grow relative to the data traffic? And I think a lot of that really comes down to the operators' decisions on policy control and how much signaling traffic they want. So I think it's interesting, if you look at the smartphone signaling we saw with 3G, by and large, that was signaling traffic they didn't want. When it comes to diameter, it's a little bit different, because the signaling traffic is a direct correlation to policy control and how you charge for things. So if you do video, or if you do Google Play, and you make it a policy control, you give it differentiated services, you can charge more for that. The downside, of course, is signaling implications, and there's a pro and a con to doing these things. I think the con, to some extent, is the amount of signaling traffic, but that's something that operators just need to plan for as they're rolling out their networks.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Great. Well, and that kind of leads, I guess, maybe into a final question too. Just kind of looking forward on this, on the market. Where do you see? Obviously, it seems like there's a lot of headroom still for this market, for companies getting involved here. Still a lot of opportunities, a lot of potential for this to kind of be a big revenue driver. I've seen some of the reports that show a huge growth in this market over the next 4 years or so. Do you kind of see this market as still being, I mean the diameter market, still being kind of in its infancy at this point, and still with a lot of room for growth going forward?
Well, I think yes, for two reasons. I mean, first of all, LTE is very immature. There's very few networks that are deployed there today, and to the extent they are deployed, I mean, it's still the very, very early days when it comes to diameter signaling and the amount of traffic you're going to have. So I mean, some operators may have planned for the next year, the next 2 years, but as you start introducing all of these services and policies on top of the overall data traffic, that's when you start to see the growth. And so to a large extent, I mean, if you're in there today, you got a footprint, that's great, but definitely from a capacity expansion perspective, as well as new networks being deployed, there's definitely lots of opportunity.
Got it. Makes sense. Well, great. Well, Mike, definitely appreciate it. And for those of you who are watching this here, this Michael Thelender, he's the CEO and founder of Signals Research. They've done a lot of work on the core part of the network. So, I mean, if you want some background on a lot of kind of the in-depth nuts and bolts almost, and also the radio aspect of a network. Signals Research has a lot of good resources on that, so definitely recommend you check out their website and see what they have there. So Michael, thanks so much for for the insight there. And now before we finish up, I want to bring on Joanne Steinberg from Techelec. Now Techelec works in this space. They're one of the diameter providers, so we want to have Diane kind of provide, I guess, a little bit of insight from what she's seeing from, I guess, the inside of the market, and kind of what Techelec brings to this space as well. So Joanne, thanks so much for joining us here. And maybe, I guess, provide a little bit of insight on kind of what Techelec brings to this space.
Sure. Mike captured many of the aspects very well. One of the things I would say is we're seeing more rapid decisions around introducing diameter signaling routers into the core of these early LTE rollouts. We have about 24 customers now for our diameter signaling router, including a lot of tier ones that are just now beginning rolling out of their LTE networks around the world. And the reason they're putting in this diameter signaling core architecture initially is because in the early rollouts we already had some signaling storms, even on networks with very few subscribers on them. And the reason is there's a lot more diameter signaling interactions in these LTE networks than what we've seen in the early rollouts in the 3G networks. And what's really driving that is the increased communications that need to occur between policy servers, charging systems, subscriber databases, and gateways in the LTE networks, as the operators have shifted from the unlimited data plans onto more usage-based service plans. And if you look at a lot of the service plans that they're planning on introducing for LTE, a lot of them are focused on tiered services, shared data plans, day passes, various different types of roaming packages. All of these types of new services increase the amount of diameter transactions on the network because you need more communications between all these different charging and policy and other kinds of servers. And the other thing that's really driving it is a lot of increased requirements for quality of service on LTE networks for policy for things like voice over LTE and video over LTE. So we actually put out a forecast of diameter traffic comparing it to mobile data traffic, and we're projecting that over the 2011 to 2016 period that the diameter signaling traffic is going to grow 3 times faster than mobile data traffic at about a 250% CAGR. So we see certainly a very big opportunity for diameter signaling that's directly correlated to how operators monetize mobile data on their LTE networks.
Got it. That makes sense. And maybe just one, I guess, a little follow-up too is, are you seeing more growth right now in this market from domestic, or are you seeing it more international? What's kind of, where's Techelec seeing kind of, I guess, most of the business at this point?
It's directly tied to the rollout timings of the LTE network. So as you know, North America has been the lead adopters of LTE, and we have all the major tier 1 operators pretty well across North America with live LTE networks today. And so a lot of our initial business has been in North America, but we're now starting to see more wins especially around Asia, Middle East, parts of the Middle East, very active in rolling out live LTE networks, Northern Europe, and Brazil, for example.
Got it. Perfect. Well, sounds good. Well, hey, guys, thanks so much again. Michael Thelender, again, CEO and founder of Signals Research. Thanks a lot, Mike, for taking the time today. Appreciate the insight there. And Joanne Steinberg, Director of Strategic Marketing at Techelec. Thanks so much, Joanne, for taking the time as well today. Definitely appreciate it. And hopefully we can talk again on this topic as the market continues to grow. So thanks so much, guys, for the time today.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.